Greetings. Okay, so we are going to be doing some practical work today. And so in this reading in Parinama Method, we are in techniques and exercises. And one of the things for the fifth hub, which is expression and communication, and I was just thinking about, as I was coming on, about how I'd been balking in the last reading about just how I was like, this is my professional life. I don't feel as connected to that. And in retrospect, realizing that I'm transitioning out of a kind of more ephemeral period of working on this and exploration into, and I will say it's a little bit itchy and uncomfortable, into re-entry into, kind of like conventional world realities as I'm starting to move into the process of like, how do I bring this into the world in a way that is like that has integrity with who I am. But here's the thing I want to get to. I want to get to the point a little bit faster on this, which is that the practicality of Parinama Method is really one of the yokes, like one of the linking aspects of this, about how the exploration that we get into and all of these more like esoteric practices um of thinking, it's like considerations and even finding these qualities in ourselves is ultimately winds up being a projection into being a lot more effective and happier as a result of that, in the absolute conventional sense of the word, in the conventional world, and how these things link together. So, it's funny because even just a couple days ago, I was really like, ooh, like as I was transitioning out of a summer of really working on this in earnest and coming to my own deeper understanding of how this is practiced to really integrate with a like life that's actually happening, not in the clouds, but in like an applied sense. And so, I mean, this is transform everything is a practical and philosophical guide. And as you'll remember earlier, we talk about negotiation. And in the Parinama for Beginners, in the book on page, I think it's like 129, we're looking at how to effectively negotiate. And we're talking about, and we're let's integrating things that are really important about how to actually affect your life in a way that the inner world and the arising of your integrity and your authenticity can be operating in concert with having a really successful and fruitful life in in the conventional sense. That this isn't like a requirement, like where of like renunciate, life, where, this is really about like, how do you bring these practices of finding your power, finding your emotional capacity, finding your love for yourself, finding your sense of trust and security. I did those out of order. And bringing them into like having this full life. And part of what we're going to talk about today is actually, most of what we're going to talk about today is the component as it relates to the fifth hub, which is a very practical application of everything that we've talked about. And that is using voice, tone, and pitch to become a more effective communicator, and that effective communication arising out of ourselves. Not, and so I'll get a little bit more into it, like we'll get a lot more into it. But the importance of being able to effectively communicate is that, like many things, Parinama, like in the Parinama verse, I'll call it, there's a lot of things that we take on as adaptations, as far as like how to be effective in the world as we understand it, as an adaptation. And a lot of what we talk about in the adaptations for the fifth hub is our voice, tone of voice, how the voice is being used. And you think of all the societal factors that'll shape our voice and tone and pitch into a reflex where, especially for socialization, as far as like being a woman, that there's going to be kind of like a making your voice smaller, cuter, less threatening, socializes men in the opposite direction. And what we're trying to find here is the ability to use our voice consciously, because most of, like any adaptation, it's an adopted reflex that winds up just being this default, but it's actually like takes energy to uphold it. And that's, in like, and it's being upheld to keep us feeling safe. And oftentimes for conditions that are no longer present, so that the acting, like the behavior of the action is actually reinforcing a notion, like of the reflex is reinforcing a notion that kind of like a historical threat still exists. So as we relax that, as we loosen it, as we find more in it, we start to like other like other expansion starts to happen and is made possible. So all right, like let's see, I'm going to take a sip of water here. So and this is actually a spoiler alert, I can see on the page. So I don't want to go too much into what we're going to read into here, but the important part of what we're doing with this, and we're on page 206, and I will possibly go into, oh wait, is it 208? 208, sorry. Yeah, we'll just say we're 208, is that we're using, so there's a combination of two things that we're doing, which is one of them is the exploration of coming into our voice as an actual authentic expression of who we are, and also as a instrument, so that like like the notion that the voice can be used as an instrument to make us effective in different types of situations. And when we don't have the dynamism in this hub, we stay stuck in, because it hasn't been consciously surfaced and considered, is that our voice just winds up having this kind of like default adaptation to it, like the reflexiveness to it. So if it's like really high and it's like, or if it's like, yeah, I just really think, or if it's like, listen, you're not like, I really think that you need to pay attention to this, or it's like, I think you really need to pay attention to this. Like, I think you should pay, like, I think you should pay attention to this. There, it's just like realizing that it's like back to the Morabian's like 3 V's, that the words are a very small amount of what we're actually communicating, essential, granted, but that our actual command of this hub has to do with understanding how to utilize it, especially in terms of feeling it arise naturally as an expression of who we are. And this can be tricky, and we won't get, we're going to point to it in this reading, but this can be an ongoing exploration. Yeah. So I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll just talk through it as we go. Let's see. I think I have talked about this before, that like my own experience with losing my, ingenue, like upward lilting voice, and how much I didn't want to do that initially, because I didn't want to lose cuteness. I didn't want to lose cuteness. I didn't want to lose cuteness. I didn't want to lose the power of femininity. I think I already felt like, listen, I'm a tall, like big woman. It's like I was already like, oh God, like, how like I don't want to lose this, and so that reconciliation was not one without an amount of angst, but it was like in the tuning into um, like authentically representing myself. Like, I think one of the things that I found, and one of the things we do tend to find, is that yes, we do lose attraction, or we stop signaling to people that pick up the signal of an adaptation, because they do. um, those people stop responding to us, which can initially feel like a rejection, but ultimately, when we start magnetically attracting people that respond to our authenticity, it becomes really um, rewarding, and there can be a little hang time between those. So, there's that. Okay, so I'm gonna read here. So voice, Badoop. So voice. Earlier, I discussed the Morabian three V's of communication: verbal, vocal, and visual. The vocal tone, modulation, and cadence are 38% of what a listener perceives. The trick is to have self awareness and to shift communication into conscious control. So, when we carefully choose our words to be effective, we can strengthen the message even more by using our voice. So, let's see. Okay, so we're going to talk about tone. I'm going to see if we hit all these things here, which are like tone, modulation, and cadence. Are you going to get that? I don't think so. Okay. So, one of the things that I will say about my tone and modulation that is, for me, something that still in terms of, and this relates to my third hub, is that I have a very informal, um, like, even though my tone is like an even tone, like where I don't talk, like I don't upward modulate, like I don't talk up and I don't lilt, there still is like my modulation and cadence is pretty informal. And as an executive, that was something I got a lot of feedback on, because I think one of the things was I've always been interested in skewing more towards the people who work for me than the people that I work for, which is just a thing about me that is not like a point of valor or anything. It's just a point of like whatever. But the thing is that we want it to be a conscious choice. So it's not just something that is impacting the way that we're perceived and the way that people are receiving our communication without us being aware of it and making the decisions about, okay, this is actually like a choice. We'll talk, I think the awareness of tone is something we'll get into. So tone. Tone next. Okay. The 5 primary factors that inform our vocal tone are speed, volume, enthusiasm, prosody, and the use of silence. So when we are conscious of these factors, we can use them to increase the effectiveness and impact of our verbal communication. Yeah, I'm going to keep going. So exercise, remove the content. So listen to people talking, preferably in another language. If you live in a city, it's easier. Instead of focusing on the words, tune into the tone along with the variation of pitch and cadence. So notice, do they seem energized or exhausted? Do they sound frustrated, happy, or something else? Being just 10% more energized than the person you speak to is a rule of thumb for infusing energy into a conversation. I mean, yeah, okay. I'm not going to talk more to that. Okay, are they talking fast or slow, high or low? What does their tone tell you about them right now? Are they dominating the conversation or letting other people speak? What is your impression? Do you find them likable? What is it that you like or dislike about their tone and cadence? Without knowing them, how do you reflexively feel about them? Are they annoying, funny, scary? What else about them are you noticing about how they sound that's contributing to your impression? So I used to do this. This was something when I was working on these modules for developing organizations, which was, I guess it was either, a little bit ahead of its time because, um, but it was something I spent a lot of time considering and very likely considering because I was a woman who was working in a like 99% male industry. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about like what are the hacks that I can use to work around like the biases that I was facing because it was a very in every single direction. I was working with in tech, which is very bro, like kind of, yeah, tech bro. It's this thing. I was working in like large commercial and industrial facilities and operations for energy management for these big contracts. And so part of what I was trying to figure out was how to really navigate this and work it so I could use the biases in to my advantage, and also that I could, figure out some ways that I could play like outside the lines of visibility. And so I knew that, because one of the things when we're talking about tone modulation and cadence, a lot of this stuff is not being picked up consciously. So there's a lot that we're signaling without people consciously picking it up. So they're just sort of reading us. And it's kind of like that saying of like you teach people how to treat you. It's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, I was like sending a signal of like, this is who I am by consciously maneuvering it because so there's that. And that's this is the practical side of this. And we're not going to go too deep into it. I mean, this is one page, but I think if anything, the purpose of this would ultimately be to just start to bring attention to these factors of your communication and realize that they play into um, the control and command you have of your verbal communication. I think that that's the biggest takeaway here. And as far as the natural arising aspect of it, that to me, and this and like the only way that or the way that I'm um I don't know, like imparting this, I guess, is from where it arose for me, which was from, you know, a professional world, that had to do with figuring out how to build, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business. So, yeah. So, I mean, the practical outcomes are, you know, undeniable of the fact that this stuff works when applied. And it's kind of like, well, what are you talking about? Well, let's talk about exercise, awareness of tone. So this is an exercise I did in small groups with my sales teams over the years. You can do this alone by recording your voice. First, write down 2 or 3 descriptive words you'd like people to use when they characterize you. Examples: confident, smart, charming. Next, record yourself either making the introduction from the above exercise, from the elevator pitch, or giving a little simple opinion of your favorite restaurant and why you recommend it. Take a short break, then listen. What are the 2 or 3 words you would use to describe the voice you hear? Are they different from the descriptors you first wrote down? This can be cringe-inducing, as many of us avoid hearing our voices at any cost, but shifting the power and impact of your spoken voice requires awareness of it. Try to identify where your tone and modulation affect the impression you give with your voice. And this is something, I mean, this is like one of those things that people immediately recognize, which is like how much they hate to hear their voice. And part of it is because it sounds different than they think it does. And that is like standing on the precipice, like of not actually like stepping into awareness of that is one of those things where it's like, look, the little like sort of pinprick of cringe with it is and like keeping ourselves away from the awareness of what we sound like, and like letting that like aware that gap exist and operate in the world without really honestly our consciousness around it, is there's a tremendous cost to it. There's a tremendous cost to it. And so, one of the things was just the intent. So when I used to do this with folks, it was like the thing about the way it would work is they'd write down the 3 adjectives that they'd want someone to describe them as, and then the other people in the group, and this there'd be a lot of trust that we'd develop in terms of being constructive, and also everybody was on the hook for it, so that also helps when everybody's going to do an exercise. Um, you know, it's like to yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. But then, after each person did their, like, pitch, folks would write down the 3 adjectives they felt like were the descriptors of the person speaking. And, I mean, the eye-opening part of that was that the person receiving that was like, "Oh, that's not what I thought." Like a lot of, yeah, I mean, I won't even give examples, but one of the things that was helpful is people used to have them hung up in their workspaces, and and part of the thing about, if you want to sound, more informed, if you want to sound more confident, it's realizing, I mean, even going back into chapter 6 with in the third hub, which is realizing it's like slowing down a bit, you know, like what are the things that are going to, what are the qualities that are going to impart what you want to, um, like how you want to be portraying yourself consciously, and what feels right to you, like, and working through that, like finding the signature of your communication in terms of your tone of voice and how you talk. I mean, I talk a little bit like a valley girl, like even though, yeah, like back to the thing with my tone, I still have use a lot of likes and ums, and yeah, that's a thing. And quite frankly, part of it, so candidly, one of the reasons that in this type of format, so I can, so I'll shift if I want to be conveying a more commanding presence that comes relatively easy for me, and it's very high voltage. So one of the things that I do with kind of buffering it with some of the, it sounds like I'm a psychopath, I'm saying this, but it's actually just more the same thing as choosing words, choosing tone and modulation. Like, it's the same thing. Um, that, yeah, it's making things just like kind of a little bit, I think, oh, I don't know, I wouldn't call it like, it's like softening a little bit, because my very naturally arising way of communication is extraordinarily pointed. It's extraordinarily pointed. Especially when I'm busy. Yeah. Okay. So, how are we doing? Doing all right? Okay. So, pitch. Talking in a high pitched voice is unthreatening and signals youth. Youth, it signals youth. Notice how a heightened tone involves the restriction of the throat and breathing. To establish more command with your voice, reduce the constriction of your throat and back of mouth and drop your tone. Relaxing the chest and throat and speaking in a natural voice helps us to sound in control and mature. Using upspeak signals a lack of power. It registers as apologetic because the speaker is trying to be non-threatening when they're already not a threat. So ending a sentence with a neutral tone indicates confidence and comfort. And to demonstrate power, drop your tone at the end of a sentence. However, the point here is that if you do want to sound cute and unthreatening, make it a conscious choice. Being aware, like bring awareness and intention to all facets of your communication. So if you have someone, and this is a way that you can stay in your own space as far as being able to like handle a situation, is tonality. So, if you have someone that you're drawing a line with, is to say, you know, so this behavior is not something that I would like to see in the future. I think that it really makes, you know, me feel, yeah, like it really makes me feel devalued. And I don't, versus like, this is behavior that I don't want to see in the future, really makes me feel devalued. And that even tone is like fantastic for like all manner, without the upward lilt. But also one of the things is when you're starting to draw a line with people is to say this behavior is, I forget what the original thing was. I should have written it down. Like, what was the thing? I wish I could rewind and listen to because I want to say the same thing. But, to say like this behavior, it is not what like, and like you can drop. It's the opposite of lilting. It's the opposite of lilting. It's like, you can really look at like, I'm going to do it at the end of a sentence. And when I say this, I'm going to mean it. And the bottom line is that I don't, like, I'm not going to tolerate this any further. So you think about like, the bottom line is I'm not going to tolerate this any further. The bottom line is I'm not going to tolerate this any further. The bottom line is I'm not going to tolerate this any further. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And so using this as a tool to signal to people is a lot like, so you look at the words, you're like, just tell them you're not going to take it anymore. It's like, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to take it anymore. It's like, ta-da. That in and of itself is practice that. Practice that. If this isn't in your arsenal already, is practice that. It's a tool, it's a tool. And so just bringing awareness into the impact that this has in your communication and how powerful it is. How powerful it is? How powerful it is? I mean, it's really pretty powerful, it's really pretty powerful. And it's really pretty powerful. I mean, you can even say you have like, it's like, you can even say it's even like even you could add in likes and pretty and like all like, so like, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the things are like, don't say like and stuff. It's like, if you adjust your tone, it doesn't really fucking matter. Or it like, I mean, it's probably optimized for power is to be really succinct, slow, and low. to like to emphasize power, to emphasize the antithesis of power, to like just ease and like non-threatening. It's like really chatty, really fast, and really high pitched. So it's kind of like there you have it. And if you want, and like one of the things is like cutting straight down the middle, which is, you know, like cutting straight down the middle is like as far as being like a move, I think that that's one of the things is like it doesn't create a lot of reactivity, and I think that that's one of the important things is that you have it like is that. So, okay. So, I think that I might read a little bit more here. So pattern interrupting and tone. So, these are all things that are from the professional archives. So pattern interrupting and tone. So, if you must talk for a long time, people will tune you out. You probably start tuning me out right now. One way to tune them back in is to shift your tone and volume, and to pause in unexpected places, and to emphasize, elongate, or shorten words in unexpected ways. So one of the things that's happening when we tune people out is that it's almost like what we do is we've clocked their tone and cadence. So we actually are like knowing how to actually appear responsive. So we kind of go, oh yeah, right. And some people are terrible at this. But so one of the things that we're doing is it's almost like we're like rebooting their need to be paying attention, because there's stuff that they don't understand about how to like effectively like partially listen. So this is sort of a hack that, I mean, even just stopping in weird places and not being like, I mean, I wouldn't encourage being a jerk about it, but, if you're talking, I even have a thing, I'll be honest, if I'm presenting where I can like when you start to sense it, where it's just like doing like kind of like, so any, like who's had experience with this kind of thing? Just been like, who's familiar with this so far? Or even asking a question like who, like just at like a stopping talking, because it like one of the things, and this is one of the things here with this format that's kind of like a little cringe for me, is that this has so much uninterrupted talking in it. I haven't had that much, to be honest, I haven't had that much a problem. I think some of them have a quality where I feel like they stay kind of like in the strike zone, and other ones where they're getting a little too effusive. And because I'm not talking with people, I don't have as much of a sense of like being able to read the response of people. So that's another kind of weird thing about this. And the practice of doing this now for like 9 months that I've been talking into like a void, that like it's kind of cool, because in some ways it's like increased my level of comfort and kind of sensibility in this. But the one thing that I keep, I talk to a lot, is missing that interaction and also being countered. I really value here having people offer contradictory perspectives. I really like dissension. I think it's really interesting, because it's kind of like, it's sort of like it's like it's like a rejuvenating quality, because it's like this like calcified notion that we like have the answer, we know the answer, and it's like so low energy to be like, all I have to do is just kind of say this thing I know, and it's like, blah blah blah. And versus being challenged on that, and having to like shift and grow and evolve and like consider other perspectives. That is just one of the things I think that is youthing, and also back to my own choice of tone and modulation is part of my natural, like, very I have this very kind of bossy tone that I think cuts people off from feeling like I wanna hear what they have to say. I think people tend to already with me feel a little bit like kind of, like that I really need to actively invite people in. And I've found maybe, hopefully not here, but in my professional life, people, folks have expressed feeling, I guess, intimidated to speak up. So, yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm going to read this. Actually, I'm going to read this last part. It's harmony and discord. This is on page 209. I really love this, so I'm going to read it. I remember it now. I just scanned it and I saw, oh, this is great. So Masao Watanabe, Masao Watanabe, professor emeritus at the University of Tokyo, wrote about the cultural differences between East and West in an article published in Science titled "The Conception of Nature in Japanese Culture." He explained how conversation creates either discord or harmony. The example he used starts with the statement, "A whale is not a fish." So, a standard Western response is to the statement itself. So, no, a whale is not a fish, in an attempt to agree, but ultimately is discordant. According to Watanabe, a Japanese response to the speaker creates harmonious agreement by, quote, saying, "Yes, of course it is not a fish." Both respond response responses say the same thing, but one response creates harmony while the other introduces subtle opposition, even though there is agreement. Creating greater harmony in conversations makes us more likable and in general leads itself to people being more agreeable with us. I really love that. I really loved that. I thought that was such an interesting thought, to introduce, which is like a whale is not a fish. And for me, as a Westerner, it's like, no, a whale is, just like, yeah, no, a whale is not a fish. No, a whale is not a fish. Feels very natural to me. Versus, yes, of course it is not a fish, which is like this really like lovely, I don't know, it's kind of a lovely thought. If anything, I don't even know that there's that much that's practical there. I think one of the things in this section that's missing is language and the like in terms of expression, and for folks who speak more than one language and write in more than one language, like how that expands the capacity to understand the structural component of how language shapes us culturally, and even expands our notion of kind of like ideas. Like remember in the, I think it was like the 90s, where the Volkswagen commercial Fahrvergnügen, the German word, which was the verb for the joy of driving, and it's like, oh, like just and that being an example of how languages will have different terms and words, and as a result they'll, expand our like a sense of reality, in a sense, like how shaping that is, that this is certainly not a new philosophical notion that language is like a cage to our perception, because we get stuck in the words that we have to use and even how we use them in terms of sentence structure. And and this is where art becomes really important in this hub, and poetry and other ways of expression, where we're using words differently, where we're expressing things without being limited by words. Like, so um it's this, I was thinking this morning about how this chapter is kind of more of a pointing to contemplation than it is what I feel like a full, like, very, I don't know. It feels like it feels like a placeholder for, like, a level of contemplation. Because one of the things I saw, there was a article about women not being heard in healthcare, about and their pain not being taken seriously. And I guess the thing is, this section does point to the importance of being heard and listened to. That does get mentioned, and we certainly talk about it in Party Number for Beginners, and also in the, like, in when we're, like, in the exploration of, like, the 5 primary needs, one of to, like, be understood and have someone or people be interested in what you have to say and delighted in it. But just to be heard, the importance of that as a very human thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think the practical point here that I want to bring in is when we're talking about pitch. So in summary, the pitch notion, becoming aware. So if you have the courage to do the exercise of listening to your voice and realizing, like, oh, it's a little higher than I thought it was. Oh, or it's a little flatter, or it's a little this, or it's a little that, like, and just, like, kind of say, I want to kind of bring some consciousness into shifting that a little bit. So there's that. And even just being able to be dynamic with using, because there are times where being less threatening is beneficial. So being able to talk higher and lilt and, like, be, like, kind of sweeter, can soften a situation. And so it's not, yeah. These are tools. So, and, like, the fact that a lot of women tend to lean towards the, sort of a more high pitched, kind of less threatening tone is a tool. Demonstrating power can be, in certain situations, can flag, and, like, what was it, like, activate people. So being able to be dynamic in our voice tone and pitch is part of our full command of our lived experience, and gives us more ability to be effective in, like, unique and dynamic ways. So I will leave it at that. We have a couple, like, we're going to do creating and journaling next. And then we have some practical, so I early on said, like, this doesn't have we have a lot actually in here for, charging and discharging. We've got some affirmations here, journaling, creating. For journaling, I might even, like, read, because in chapter 11 of the book, we get into, like, a sort of a broader exploration of, why am I having a hard time talking right now, of journaling practices and different journaling practices. So I might pull a couple of those in. We'll see. If you have the book, just go to chapter 11. We already did the fuck you journal, but there's a bunch of other prompts that are helpful for emotional hygiene journaling and processing stuff and surfacing things. So there is that. Okay, so we've 43 minutes. I think we did it. I just want to say thank you for all the interaction, reaching out, folks writing me notes in DMs. Totally, like, appreciate that. And to the extent that I can respond, I do. The But I really like in as quickly as possible. So likes, interactions, comments, they mean a lot to me. And I love hearing what you have to say. And I will say that I look forward to having a format where this can be more of a conversation. And part of right now is figuring out what that looks like. So if you have any thoughts on that, those are welcomed also. So I appreciate so much. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.